They planned a huge retirement party for my father-in-law, invited hundreds of people, and forgot one name on the list: mine. I stood there in my best dress with no chair, no name card, and no place at their table, while my husband laughed like it was all a joke. That moment changed everything. I didn't argue or make a scene. I simply walked away, opened my laptop, and started making calls. By the time they realized what I had done, the party they'd spent months planning was already falling apart, and they had no idea how far I was going to take it. My name is Emily Carter. I built my own event planning company from scratch, long before I ever met my husband Ryan. I wasn't born into money like his family, but I had something they didn't discipline. Every detail, every event, every successful evening in my career came from years of hard work and long nights. I learned early that respect doesn't come easily, especially when you marry into a family that sees you as an outsider. I thought they'd warm up to me over time. Instead, they just learned new ways to make me feel small. Ryan's family, the Hendersons, were old money. They owned half the commercial real estate downtown, always hosted charity dinners, and cared more about appearances than relationships. His mother, Linda, spoke in compliments that carried insults. His sister, Grace, smiled while cutting you down. And Ryan, he always told me to let it go, as if pretending not to notice would make it disappear. At first, I did. I wanted peace, not arguments. But the truth was simple. No matter what I did, I was never going to be one of them. When Charles, my father-in-law, announced his retirement, the family wanted to throw a party that would make headlines. Ryan suggested I plan it since I was the professional. I saw it as a chance to prove myself, to finally earn a seat at their table. I spent weeks designing everything: the theme, the lighting, the music, even a video tribute that covered Charles's entire career. Every vendor knew me by name, every contract passed through my hands. It was the biggest event I had ever handled. I wanted it to be perfect, not for them, but for me. As the date got closer, small things started to bother me. Family group messages that once included me suddenly didn't. Meetings about the event were scheduled without my knowledge. When I asked about updates, Linda said she was just helping coordinate. It sounded harmless, but something about her tone made my stomach turn. She wanted control. I told myself it didn't matter as long as the event succeeded. Still, I began saving every email, every invoice, every message, just in case the help turned into something else. I worked non-stop that final week. The ballroom looked breathtaking. White roses lined the tables, the chandeliers sparkled, and the sound crew tested the music that would play as Charles walked in. I checked everything twice, then once more for good measure. I didn't expect gratitude, but I hoped for at least acknowledgement. Ryan was too distracted to notice how much effort I was putting in. He spent most of his time on calls with his sister, whispering about small adjustments. By then, I had learned not to ask questions. On the morning of the party, I woke up before sunrise. I ironed my dress, packed my laptop, and reviewed the schedule one last time. The whole event depended on precision. Timing mattered. I arrived at the hotel early to oversee setup. Staff greeted me warmly. They respected me because I treated them like equals, something the Hendersons never did. By noon, everything was running smoothly. The decorations, the food, the lighting, all perfect. I stood at the back of the ballroom, proud, unaware that I was hours away from the humiliation that would break everything open. Guests began arriving that evening. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Photographers lined the entrance, snapping pictures as the Hendersons posed in front of a golden backdrop. I stayed behind the scenes, checking the sound cues and cue cards for the speeches. I didn't mind staying in the background. That's what planners do. But when I saw the seating chart on the welcome stand, something caught my eye. My name wasn't there. Every spouse, every partner, every distant cousin had a spot, except me. My heart sank, but I forced a smile. Maybe it was a printing mistake. I walked up to Ryan quietly, trying to show him the chart without making a scene. He glanced at it, shrugged, and said it was probably just an oversight. But the way he laughed with his sister moments later told me otherwise. Linda smirked, whispering something behind her champagne glass. The room spun a little, but I stayed composed. I took a deep breath and told myself to stay calm. I had been disrespected by this family before, but this time, they had done it in front of everyone. That changed everything. When the guests started taking their seats, I stood at the edge of the room, pretending to check my phone. Every seat filled up quickly, tables full of laughter, silverware clinking, flashes from cameras. My husband didn't even look back to see where I was. I had never felt so invisible. But instead of breaking down, something inside me hardened. I realized I was done trying to earn a place among people who would never respect me. I wasn't part of their family, but I was the one holding their entire event together. That gave me power. I slipped out of the ballroom and into the quiet service hallway that led to the hotel offices. I opened my laptop and logged into my event dashboard. Every vendor contract, every booking, every authorization ran through my business account. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my reflection faint in the glass. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. They wanted to make me feel like I didn't matter. Fine, then they could find out what their celebration looked like without me holding it together. My finger hovered over the first control button. I started small. The catering service received a pause notice from my company's account, instructing them to hold serving until further approval. Then the lighting company got a message to delay the stage illumination until payment verification. I moved quickly, methodically, like it was any other job. But this time, the job wasn't about creating beauty, it was about balance. For years, they'd taken advantage of my silence. This was me showing them what happened when I stopped saying nothing. Within minutes, the system confirmed my changes. Everything would unravel quietly at first. I went back toward the ballroom, blending in with guests wandering near the hallway. Inside, speeches had begun. Charles was thanking everyone for their love and support, his voice echoing through the speakers I'd arranged. I watched from a distance, waiting. The servers brought out the first round of drinks, but then hesitated as new alerts popped up on their screens. The bartender looked toward the manager with confusion. I recognized the exact moment when my commands took effect. My pulse stayed steady. I wasn't ruining the night. They had done that themselves. Ryan's cousin came to find me, saying they were missing one dinner course and needed me to fix it. I smiled politely, pretending to head toward the kitchen, but instead I opened my phone. I sent the next set of cancellations, floral deliveries for tomorrow's brunch, and the scheduled after-party shuttle. My control over every detail gave me leverage they never realized I had. Every piece of this event ran through me. For once, that truth didn't make me tired. It made me feel powerful. I looked back at the ballroom doors and knew this was just the beginning. As the night went on, the first signs of collapse appeared. The lights dimmed unevenly. The music cut mid-song. The servers began collecting plates without explanation. Guests looked confused, murmuring to one another. Charles tried to laugh it off, assuming it was a minor glitch. But panic flickered behind Linda's polished smile. She whispered to Ryan, who started searching the room for me. I had already left the building, sitting in my car across the street, watching from the window. My phone buzzed with new notifications. The machine I built was quietly turning against them. For years I'd been told to stay quiet, to play nice, to be grateful for what I was given. But standing there in the dark parking lot, I realized I had never needed their approval. I built this career on my own. I could destroy their little illusion just as easily as I built it. I took a deep breath, leaned back, and waited for the fallout. They wanted to remind me of my place. Tonight they'd remember exactly who made that place possible, and they would never forget it. Ryan's first call came through 15 minutes later. I didn't answer. Then Linda texted me, asking why the service had stopped. I stared at the message, remembering every condescending comment she had ever made. Every time she'd called my business cute. I turned off notifications and placed my phone face down on the passenger seat. Across the street, I could see the ballroom glowing through tall glass windows. The laughter that had once made me feel invisible was fading, replaced by confusion. My silence, for once, was louder than anything I could have said. Inside, the manager was scrambling. I knew how it would unfold. Vendors would start asking for payment verification, and when no valid card appeared, services would freeze one by one. Years of experience told me exactly how quickly chaos could spread in a high-profile event. I imagined Linda's voice rising, Ryan pretending to stay calm, Charles trying to maintain dignity while the waitstaff whispered. For the first time, the family would experience what it felt like to lose control in public. The difference was, I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. I was the one pulling the strings. I leaned back in my seat and thought about the years that had led to this night. The polite insults, the forced smiles, the empty invitations where I sat at the far end of the table. They'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. That was their biggest mistake. My calm was never submission, it was strategy. I had learned from watching them that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just waits for the perfect moment to speak. And this, right now, was my moment. I picked up my phone again and checked the next set of cancellations, waiting for approval. The florist messaged me about the arrangements scheduled for tomorrow's breakfast. I authorized the cancellation and transferred the funds back into my account. Then I paused the transportation bookings for the family's weekend retreat. Each move was clean, traceable, and completely within my rights. Everything had been booked under my company. I wasn't breaking any laws, I was just taking back what was mine. I scrolled through the messages again and saw Ryan's name flashing across the screen. He was calling again. I let it ring out. He would learn what silence felt like tonight. At the half-hour mark, I saw movement inside the hotel lobby. Ryan stepped out, scanning the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear. He looked frustrated, his perfect composure cracking for the first time. Linda followed close behind, her expression tight, her expensive necklace catching the light. Even from here, I could see the tension in her jaw. She had spent her life controlling every social moment, every headline, but this time, no amount of charm could save her. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the scene sink in. It was the calmest I'd felt in years. Before we go further, if you've ever been treated like you didn't belong, take a second to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This story is for anyone who's ever been underestimated and found power in silence. Now let's see what happened next. Ryan finally spotted me through the car window. He walked toward me quickly, phone still in hand. I rolled the window down halfway and waited. His voice was raised, asking what I'd done, demanding explanations. I didn't argue or justify. I simply said the event was no longer my responsibility. His eyes widened as he realized what that meant. I wasn't bluffing. I was finished. He tried to reason with me, saying it was a misunderstanding. I just turned the key, started the car, and drove away, leaving him standing under the hotel lights, completely powerless. I didn't go home. Instead, I stopped a few blocks away at a small cafe that stayed open late. It was quiet there, just the hum of soft music and a few locals chatting over pastries. I took a corner seat near the window and opened my laptop again. My inbox was overflowing, vendors asking for confirmation, invoices updating automatically, refund receipts appearing one by one. Watching everything unravel from afar gave me a strange peace. I had spent years managing their chaos. Now I was just watching them manage mine. It was strangely satisfying. While I sat there, I thought about the first time I met the Hendersons. It was at a fundraiser where Ryan had introduced me as the planner. Not his girlfriend, not his partner, just the planner. That night, I convinced myself it didn't matter, that love would bridge the gap between our worlds. But love without respect doesn't last long. I had built my business around precision and control, yet I'd allowed my personal life to be dictated by people who thrived on belittling me. Tonight wasn't revenge. It was me taking back my boundaries, one contract at a time. I watched as the hotel's social media page updated. Guests were posting confused stories, tagging the event, wondering what had gone wrong. The Henderson retirement disaster was already trending locally. I imagined Linda's reaction when she saw it, her perfect image cracking in public for the first time. I didn't need to post a thing. The story was telling itself. It wasn't my intention to humiliate them, but maybe humiliation was the only language they understood. For years, they had dismissed my efforts in private. Tonight, they would see the consequences in front of everyone. As the clock passed 10, I received one last alert, payment verification failure for the ballroom rental. The hotel manager had officially suspended the event. I knew exactly what that meant. Lights off, music off, bar closed. I closed my laptop slowly, placed it in my bag, and smiled. The party that was supposed to define the Hendersons' legacy had just collapsed under their own arrogance. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the most powerful thing you can do. And tonight, that was my form of closure. When I finally drove back to the hotel entrance, the once bustling driveway was chaotic. Guests were leaving early, some muttering complaints, others shaking their heads. The staff stood around waiting for instructions that weren't coming. Through the glass doors, I saw Linda arguing with the manager while Charles tried to calm her down. Ryan stood to the side, pacing, phone still in hand. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look uncertain. Their perfect picture had shattered, and I hadn't lifted a finger in anger, just quiet precision. That was enough to bring it all down. I stepped out of my car and walked inside, blending in with the remaining guests. No one noticed me at first. The lights flickered slightly, and the air was filled with confused chatter. The staff whispered near the bar, glancing nervously toward the Hendersons. I could tell the hotel wanted to avoid confrontation, but business came first. Without payment, nothing would move forward. I stood near a pillar, watching it unfold. Everything I had built for them was collapsing right before their eyes. And the best part? It wasn't chaos to me. It was clarity. Linda's voice carried across the room as she demanded answers. The manager explained that the event account holder had revoked authorization. Her expression froze. She turned toward Ryan, clearly expecting him to fix it. He glanced around helplessly. That's when she noticed me standing by the pillar. For a brief second, our eyes met. There was no shouting, no scene, just recognition. She knew exactly what I had done, and I could tell she hated that she couldn't stop it. I didn't look away. I just gave a polite nod and turned toward the exit once more. Outside, the night felt lighter. I sat on a nearby bench, hearing faint murmurs from inside as the music faded completely. The silence felt like justice. I opened my phone again, scrolling through the remaining event tasks. The yacht tour, the post-retirement family brunch, the farewell dinner, all canceled. Each refund request came through instantly. Every deposit I had made with my company card was now safely back in my account. For the first time, I felt like I was back in control of my own life. Their empire ran on appearances. Mine ran on action. Ryan called again, his name flashing across the screen over and over. I finally answered. His tone had changed. Less anger, more desperation. He said the guests were leaving and the staff refused to serve them. He wanted me to fix it. I told him I couldn't, because it wasn't my event anymore. His voice cracked as he tried to argue, but deep down, he knew the truth. They had pushed me out, and now they were feeling what exclusion really felt like. It wasn't revenge. It was balance being restored, one broken light at a time. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't feel regret, only relief. I checked my inbox again. Dozens of new messages from vendors confirming refunds and closing accounts tied to the Henderson name. The hotel sent a polite note thanking me for my clear communication, unaware of the personal story behind it all. I made myself breakfast, something simple, and watched the sunrise through my kitchen window. Peace felt strange, almost new. I had lived under constant tension for so long that calmness felt foreign, but it was mine, and no one could take it away. By noon, the phone started ringing again. This time, it wasn't Ryan, it was the local press. Someone had leaked that the Henderson family couldn't pay their event bills. A reporter wanted to confirm if my company had withdrawn services. I politely declined to comment. Let them guess. Let them fill in the blanks. The truth was already spreading faster than any headline. I didn't need to defend myself. The facts spoke louder than gossip ever could. For once, silence was working in my favor, and I had no plans to break it. Later that day, I drove to my office to check on pending work. My assistant looked nervous when I arrived, thinking I'd be upset about the incident. Instead, I told her everything was fine. She didn't need to know the full story. The truth was, my business had survived worse. The difference now was that I wasn't protecting anyone else's image, but my own. Clients might whisper, but new ones would come. People respect strength, even if they don't say it out loud, and I had finally shown mine in a way no one could ignore. As I left the office, I passed by the event magazine display in the lobby. One headline caught my attention: "The retirement party that never happened." A smiling photo of Charles filled the cover, his expression frozen from happier times. I stared at it for a while, thinking how quickly perfection can turn into embarrassment when truth comes to light. People like the Hendersons built their world on control, but when that control slipped, they didn't know how to survive. I had lived in their shadow long enough to learn how to live without it. That evening, Ryan showed up at my office unannounced. He looked exhausted, tie loose, hair messy, eyes hollow. He tried to act composed, asking if we could talk. I motioned for him to sit, though I already knew what he wanted. He apologized for what happened, said his family didn't mean to exclude me. I didn't argue. I just listened as he stumbled through excuses. When he finally asked me to come home, I told him quietly that there wasn't a home left to go back to. It was a sentence that felt like closure more than loss. Ryan said his parents were furious, that investors were asking questions, that their company's reputation had taken a hit overnight. I told him calmly that reputation wasn't my concern anymore. For years I'd cleaned up their messes, their late payments, their ungrateful attitudes. Not this time. He begged me to say something, to help control the story before it got worse. I told him the truth. It wasn't my story to control anymore. I had my own now, and it was finally starting to make sense. He didn't know what to say to that. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, looking at my reflection in the dark window. For years, I had doubted myself, questioned whether I was too sensitive, too emotional, too ambitious. Tonight proved I was none of those things. I was simply done being silent. The missing seat at that table had become my reminder of everything wrong with my marriage. They had erased me on purpose, but in doing so, they gave me the freedom to step out of their frame entirely, and that freedom was worth everything I'd lost. Over the next few days, articles kept appearing. Some defended the Hendersons, calling it a technical error. Others dug deeper, uncovering their growing financial troubles. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't need to. My company's name stayed clean because I had handled everything legally and professionally. Quietly, other clients began reaching out, impressed by how I had stood my ground. They saw strength where the Hendersons saw rebellion. It was ironic. The same confidence they despised in me was the reason my business was now thriving. A week later, Linda tried contacting me through a mutual acquaintance. She wanted to meet, to clear the air. I declined. There was nothing left to clear. You can't rebuild trust with people who never valued it to begin with. I didn't need an apology, and I didn't need closure from them. I already had it the night I walked away. That moment in the parking lot, with the city lights reflecting on my windshield, was the first time I felt free in years. No amount of money or apology could ever top that feeling. My days felt different now, quieter, lighter. I filled my time with new clients, small events that reminded me why I loved this work in the first place. I didn't need grandeur or prestige anymore. Simplicity felt honest. Every time I opened my laptop, I thought of that night and smiled, not with bitterness, but with peace. The missing chair that once felt like humiliation had become a symbol of independence. I hadn't lost anything that night. I'd only gained clarity, and I knew deep down that was just the beginning of a new chapter. 2 weeks after the failed retirement party, I received a letter from the hotel's legal department. They thanked me for my professionalism and attached confirmation that all refunds had been successfully processed. It was satisfying to see everything documented, neat and final. That same day, I saw an article about the Hendersons' company stock dipping after investors lost confidence. It wasn't a coincidence. Reputation was their currency, and mine had been the foundation of their image for years. Without me holding it together, their world was collapsing one headline at a time. Ryan tried to reach out again, this time through email. He said things had gotten out of hand and asked if we could talk privately. I didn't reply. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted control. He thought if he could make me feel guilty, he could undo what happened. But there was no going back. I had spent too many years minimizing myself to keep his family comfortable. That version of me didn't exist anymore. I wasn't angry at him, just finished. When respect dies, love follows soon after. That weekend, I visited my parents for the first time in months. They had never liked the Hendersons, but they had stayed polite for my sake. When I walked into their house, my mother hugged me longer than usual. My father didn't ask questions. He just said he was proud. For years, I'd been embarrassed to admit how small that family made me feel. Sitting at my parents' kitchen table, eating homemade food, I realized how different genuine care feels from forced civility. It was warmth without expectation, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, I received a call from an old client asking if I'd take on a new event. She said she'd read about how I handled the Henderson situation and admired my composure. I agreed to meet her the next day. It felt good to talk about work again, real work, not family politics disguised as help. I had built my career once, and I knew I could do it again. That one call reminded me that what I'd lost wasn't a life, it was a cage, and I was never stepping back into it. When I met the client, she asked a simple question. How did I stay calm when everything fell apart? I told her the truth. I didn't see it as something falling apart. I saw it as things finally settling into their right places. She laughed, saying that made me sound wise. Maybe I wasn't wise, just tired of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. For the first time in years, I didn't have to measure my words or hide behind politeness. It was freeing to be fully honest without fear of judgment. Back at my apartment, I started reorganizing my workspace. I deleted old files connected to the Henderson projects, cleared my inbox, and created a new folder labeled Future. It was symbolic but necessary. I wanted to make room for something better. I hung a small photo from my first ever event, a charity fundraiser I'd planned when I was just starting out. Seeing it reminded me of why I began this journey. It wasn't for prestige or attention. It was to create moments that brought people together. Ironically, the Hendersons had done the exact opposite. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace, Ryan's sister. She accused me of humiliating their family on purpose and warned that her parents were considering legal action. I read it twice and laughed quietly to myself. Every contract, every transaction, every authorization had my name on it. I had followed procedure perfectly. If they wanted to fight, they'd lose publicly. That family couldn't imagine a world where someone stood up to them without fear, but I wasn't part of their world anymore. I had nothing left for them to take. Days passed, and my story began to circulate quietly among other planners. Some saw it as bold, others as reckless. I didn't care how they labeled it. What mattered was that I'd finally stopped living in someone else's shadow. New inquiries started coming in from clients who appreciated my integrity. I wasn't just rebuilding my business. I was rebuilding my confidence. Each call, each meeting felt like a step towards something steady and real. For the first time, I felt proud of my decisions without needing anyone's approval. One afternoon, as I was finalizing a contract, Ryan showed up at my office again. He didn't have the arrogance he once carried. He looked smaller somehow, weighed down by guilt, or maybe shame. He said his parents were furious, but that he didn't blame me. He claimed he understood why I'd done what I did. I listened quietly, waiting for the part where he asked for something. It came, as always. He wanted me to sign a statement saying the hotel had made a technical mistake. I simply told him no, and stood up. Conversation over. He followed me to the door, pleading, saying this was about saving his father's legacy. I turned and looked at him for a long time. There was a time when that would have moved me, but not anymore. His father's legacy had been built on control and image, not truth. I told him that every legacy eventually reflects what it's built on. He had no response. He just stood there, looking lost. I think that was the moment he finally realized I wasn't coming back. Not emotionally, not professionally, not ever. And that realization hit him harder than anger. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. My life was quiet again, and I liked it that way. For the first time, there were no expectations pressing against me. No one watching, judging, or waiting for me to fail. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. My reflection looked different now. Stronger, sharper. I wasn't someone's wife or planner for hire anymore. I was just Emily, and that finally felt enough. A few days later, the Hendersons made an official statement blaming a technical miscommunication for the failed event. It was vague, defensive, and did nothing to repair their image. People weren't fooled. The staff, vendors, and local reporters knew the truth. I didn't correct them or speak out. I didn't need to. Silence had become my loudest weapon. Every time I refused to engage, their story crumbled a little more. Sometimes you win not by shouting, but by letting the truth echo in the space others leave behind. The next week, I attended a small wedding I had planned for a young couple. It was simple, but beautiful. String lights, soft music, laughter that felt genuine. Watching them reminded me of why I loved creating these moments. It wasn't about money or status. It was about emotion, connection, and care. The opposite of everything I'd experienced with the Hendersons. When the bride thanked me at the end, I felt tears sting my eyes. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. I was back where I belonged, doing what I was meant to do. News of the Hendersons' struggles continued. Their company faced an internal audit, and one of their investors pulled out. Ryan tried to reach me again, asking for help managing the media fallout. I didn't respond. Helping them would mean betraying the peace I'd finally earned. I wasn't cruel, but I couldn't go back to being used. They had to live with the consequences of their choices. That's how lessons are learned. You can't rescue people from the damage they cause themselves. I had done enough rescuing for one lifetime. One morning, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Charles, my father-in-law. He apologized, saying he now understood how wrong they had been. He said he wished I'd stayed, that maybe things could have been different. I believed he meant it, but it didn't change anything. Apologies lose weight when they come after loss. I wished him peace, then deleted the message. Forgiveness didn't mean returning. It just meant I was done carrying the burden of their actions. I felt lighter afterward, like closing the final page of a long, exhausting chapter. Business picked up quickly. Within months, I was busier than I'd been in years. My calendar filled with weddings, corporate events, and charity galas. The irony wasn't lost on me. While the Hendersons' empire was falling, mine was quietly expanding. People trusted me because I was steady, transparent, and reliable, traits they once mocked. Now set me apart. I wasn't chasing success anymore. I was building stability. Each successful event was another reminder that I had chosen the right path, one that didn't require approval from anyone but myself. One evening, I received an invitation to an industry awards gala. My company had been nominated for Planner of the Year. It felt surreal. Years ago, I would have called Ryan to celebrate. Now, I just smiled quietly and bought a ticket. I attended alone, wearing a simple black gown that felt elegant and confident. When my name was called as the winner, I walked to the stage with calm pride. The applause wasn't overwhelming, just sincere. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about arrival. I had finally built something that couldn't be taken from me. After the event, a journalist asked me backstage how I'd found the strength to start over after such a public fallout. I told her strength isn't something you find. It's something that shows up when you stop doubting your worth. She thanked me, saying my words might inspire others. I didn't think of myself as inspirational. I was just someone who'd been pushed far enough to stop apologizing for existing. But if my story helped someone else stand taller, then maybe all that pain had a purpose. Maybe it wasn't wasted after all. That night, I came home, placed the award on my shelf, and looked around my quiet apartment. It wasn't big or extravagant, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, every plant by the window represented independence. I brewed tea and sat on the couch, thinking about how peace feels so different from luxury. It's quieter but deeper. I didn't need chandeliers or designer dresses. I just needed space to breathe, to be myself, and to never again shrink to fit into someone else's comfort zone. That was true success. Weeks passed, and word spread that the Henderson business had officially gone under: bad investments, mismanagement, and unpaid debts. It was all over the papers. I felt no satisfaction, only closure. It wasn't my doing, it was the natural consequence of their own arrogance. I wished Ryan well in my heart, but I didn't reach out. We were two different people now, walking separate paths. His world had been built on illusion. Mine, finally, was built on truth. That difference meant everything, and it made me certain I would never go back. A few months later, I got a call from a former Henderson associate who wanted to hire me for an international conference. He said he admired how I'd handled the whole situation. I accepted, and the project became one of the biggest of my career. It was proof that integrity travels further than gossip. The more I worked, the more I realized that everything that had once hurt me had also shaped me. Every slight, every exclusion, every empty chair had pushed me to stand taller. Maybe the missing seat had been a gift after all. The international project took me to Italy. Standing on a terrace overlooking the coast, I thought back to that night outside the hotel, the glow of the ballroom, the laughter, the moment I chose silence over confrontation. I smiled at how far I'd come since then. The ocean breeze felt like freedom, something no apology or money could buy. I wasn't the woman they had excluded. I was someone who had built something better. Sometimes life doesn't give you the ending you expect. It gives you the one you need, and mine had finally arrived. After the Italy project ended, I took a short break to travel. No deadlines, no clients, just rest. I spent time walking through small towns, eating alone in quiet cafes, and rediscovering what peace feels like. I didn't realize how much I'd lost trying to keep everyone else happy. Every day on my own reminded me that solitude isn't loneliness when it's chosen. It's healing. It's space to rebuild from the inside out. I wasn't chasing success anymore. I was living it, one slow, steady breath at a time. When I returned home, a new inquiry waited in my inbox. It was from an international company that wanted to make me their lead planner for global events. They'd heard about my work ethic and how I handled adversity. They said they needed someone calm under pressure. I smiled reading that. Calm wasn't something I learned. It was something I earned. I replied yes, without hesitation. It was time to grow again, not out of survival, but out of strength. This was the future I had built, one choice at a time. Looking back, that missing chair wasn't rejection. It was redirection. It pushed me toward a version of myself that no longer needed validation. I used to think I had to earn my place in every room. Now, I just build my own. The Hendersons had tried to make me invisible, but they only made me unforgettable. The night they left me out was the night I found myself again, and that realization stayed with me every single day after. Sometimes being left out of someone's story is how you finally start writing your own. The next few months felt like a rebirth. My company expanded quickly, with clients from cities I'd only dreamed of working in before. Each project gave me new energy and confidence. I wasn't driven by proving anyone wrong anymore. I was simply doing what I loved, on my terms. I started mentoring young women entering the industry, teaching them how to set boundaries and value their skills. Helping others avoid the mistakes I'd made became my quiet mission. It felt good to turn my pain into something that actually helped someone else stand taller. One morning, while checking emails, I came across a news headline about the Hendersons. It said their company was being investigated for financial misconduct. I wasn't surprised. I had seen the warning signs years ago. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sadness, not for them, but for what could have been if they'd valued integrity over pride. I closed the article and went back to work. Their downfall no longer defined me. I had no reason to celebrate or feel guilty. It simply wasn't my story anymore, and that truth felt like peace. I began receiving speaking invitations from business conferences, asking me to share my experience about resilience in high-pressure careers. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't see myself as a speaker, but then I realized my story wasn't about revenge. It was about self-worth. On stage, I spoke about building a career without losing yourself in the process. I didn't mention names, only lessons. The audience responded warmly, nodding and smiling as I talked about finding courage in silence. I left the stage that day, knowing my story had power beyond my own healing. The more I spoke publicly, the more messages I received from women thanking me for my honesty. Some shared similar experiences of being dismissed or underestimated. Reading their messages reminded me that I wasn't alone in what I had gone through. It made me see that my story wasn't rare, it was just rarely told. I started writing small reflections online, short pieces about self-respect and quiet strength. The posts spread quickly, reaching people far outside my usual circles. I didn't plan it, but somehow my life had turned into something bigger than business. During this time, I received an unexpected letter from Charles again. He said he was retiring quietly. No parties this time. He wanted to thank me for the years I'd put into their family events, acknowledging that I had held them together more than they ever realized. I didn't reply, but I read the letter twice before placing it in a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. Sometimes people only recognize your worth once it's no longer available to them. I was fine with that. Some lessons come late, but they still count. I started traveling more often for work, sometimes staying abroad for weeks. Each city felt like a fresh start. I'd sit in quiet hotel rooms, remembering how small I used to feel, and smile at how far I'd come. There was no bitterness left, just gratitude. My life wasn't perfect, but it was finally mine. I didn't have to pretend anymore. Freedom isn't about money or success. It's about choosing your peace every single day. I had learned that the hard way, but I wouldn't change the journey. It built the version of me that could finally breathe. One evening in Paris, after finishing a corporate event, I looked at the Eiffel Tower from my hotel balcony and thought about Ryan. I wondered if he ever understood what he lost. Not just me, but the version of himself that could have been better. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was still surrounded by people telling him he'd been wronged. But deep down, I hoped he'd grown. Pain changes people. I didn't wish him harm, I just hoped he'd find honesty. Even if it took losing everything. Some people only grow after everything comfortable falls apart. Back home, I was invited to teach a workshop for young event planners. I accepted, wanting to give back to the next generation. During the session, a student asked how to handle clients who look down on you. I told her to stay professional, but to never forget her value. I explained that respect can't be demanded. It's built by how you carry yourself. I shared my own story in broad strokes, without names, and saw understanding in her eyes. If even one person learned from my mistakes, it made everything I went through worthwhile. My business became known not just for beautiful events, but for professionalism and grace under pressure. Reporters who once chased gossip now reached out to write profiles about my comeback. I turned down most interviews. I didn't need publicity. I just wanted steady work and quiet dignity. One article eventually went viral, describing me as the woman who turned exclusion into empowerment. I hadn't asked for that title, but it fit. It summed up everything I had been through. Sometimes being left out gives you the space to build something no one can take away. As time passed, I stopped thinking about the Hendersons altogether. They were part of my past, not my present. My focus was on growth, not grudges. The people around me now valued me for who I was, not who I was connected to. I built friendships that weren't based on social climbing or appearances. We supported each other honestly, without hidden motives. It was the kind of environment I'd always wanted, one where kindness didn't come with conditions. I finally understood that peace isn't about escaping others. It's about finding the right people to stand beside. One quiet Sunday morning, I took a walk by the river. The air was crisp, and the city felt peaceful. I sat on a bench, watching people pass by, and thought about how everything had changed. Years ago, I would have been checking emails, stressing about pleasing everyone else. Now, I just watched the water flow and felt content. The calm wasn't forced anymore. It was natural. It had taken losing almost everything to find that stillness inside me. Sometimes you have to break before you realize you were never meant to bend that far in the first place. That afternoon, my assistant called to tell me that a major company wanted me to handle their annual gala. The budget was huge, the timeline tight, and the location, ironically, was the same hotel where the Henderson retirement party had taken place. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Life had a strange way of circling back. I accepted the offer without hesitation. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about returning to the same place stronger than before, standing in the same halls with a completely different heart. This time, I would walk in with my head high. When I arrived at the hotel for the first planning meeting, a few staff members recognized me. They treated me with quiet respect. Remembering what had happened before, I didn't bring it up. I just focused on the work. The manager shook my hand, saying it was an honor to have me back. The ballroom looked the same, but I felt different walking through it. The memories were still there, faint but harmless now. The space that once represented humiliation had turned into proof of how much I'd grown. Nothing about it scared me anymore. I oversaw every detail of the new event personally. The decor, the lighting, the timing, all perfect. As the night unfolded, everything went smoothly. No panic, no stress, no drama. When the guests applauded the flawless evening, I stood near the back, smiling. It wasn't about recognition or applause. It was about knowing I'd built this moment through resilience, not revenge. That ballroom, once filled with laughter at my expense, now reflected quiet respect. Life had come full circle, and I had met it calmly. I didn't need closure anymore. I had already found peace. After the event ended, the hotel manager thanked me again, saying my professionalism was unmatched. He mentioned that even after all the chaos from years ago, staff still talked about how composed I'd been that night. Hearing that made me smile. People remember how you carry yourself in hard moments, not how loudly you react. I realized then that my silence hadn't just been power, it had been dignity. Walking through that same lobby now, I didn't feel like the woman they once left out. I felt like someone who had reclaimed her own story completely. Later that night, I returned home and poured a glass of wine. I looked through my company's upcoming schedule, bookings from around the world, projects that would keep me busy for months. Success didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt steady. I thought about how differently things could have gone if I had tried to fight that night instead of walking away. Anger might have satisfied me temporarily, but patience had built me something lasting. It's strange how quiet choices end up changing everything. Sometimes the strongest sound you can make is choosing not to respond at all. A week later, I received a handwritten thank you note from the company whose event I had just completed. They said they'd never worked with someone so calm under pressure. Reading that, I realized I had become the person I once needed to be for myself: steady, confident, kind. I folded the note carefully and placed it in a box where I kept reminders of progress. Each letter, each small message, was proof that I hadn't just rebuilt a business. I'd rebuilt a life, piece by piece, on the foundation of my own self-respect. One evening, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, it was Ryan. His voice was softer, slower than I remembered. He said his parents had moved away, their business gone, their social circle vanished. He wanted to apologize, not just for that night, but for every time he stayed silent when he should have stood beside me. I listened quietly. I didn't need his words anymore, but I let him speak. Forgiveness wasn't about giving him peace. It was about releasing the last thread that connected me to that chapter. I accepted his apology. After the call, I sat for a long time in silence. Forgiving him didn't feel like weakness. It felt like clearing space inside me for better things. There was no anger left, only gratitude for what that pain had taught me. I had once believed that strength came from holding on. Now I knew it came from letting go. I sent him a short message wishing him well, then deleted his number. That was the final goodbye I didn't know I still needed. I felt lighter instantly, like a weight I'd carried for years had finally lifted. The next morning, sunlight filled my apartment. I made coffee, opened my balcony doors, and breathed in the fresh air. My life was simple, but it was peaceful. The sound of the city below felt like music. I didn't have grand plans or expectations anymore, just quiet goals and steady progress. I had learned that happiness isn't something you chase. It's what's left when you stop running. The woman who once stood in a crowded ballroom with no chair had built an entire life from that empty space. That realization made everything worth it. As months passed, I began collaborating with other women-owned businesses. Together, we launched a foundation to help independent planners grow without being exploited by larger firms. Giving back became my new passion. I wanted to make the industry kinder than the one I had entered. Watching young planners succeed reminded me of how powerful it is to help others find their voice sooner than I did. Empowering them gave my own story a deeper purpose. My success now wasn't measured by wealth, but by how many people I helped rise alongside me. At one of our foundation meetings, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She said she'd followed my journey since the news about the failed retirement party, and that it gave her the courage to leave a toxic job. Hearing that touched me deeply. It reminded me that the choices we make in silence can echo louder than any public speech. I didn't set out to inspire anyone, but life had turned my pain into someone else's hope. That, more than any award or title, was what real success felt like. The foundation grew faster than I expected. We began offering scholarships, mentorships, and networking events. It felt like coming full circle, turning something that once broke me into something that built others. Every story I heard reminded me why I had endured everything. The missing seat had never been a loss. It had been an opening, the beginning of something bigger. Each day I woke up knowing that the life I had now was one I'd earned, not inherited, and that difference made every small victory feel enormous. One night, while reviewing proposals, I came across the event files from the Henderson party, saved deep in my old archives. For a moment, I hovered over the folder, deciding whether to delete it. Then I smiled and closed it instead. I didn't need to erase the past. It was proof of how far I'd come. Every misstep, every wound, every lesson had led me here. That folder wasn't a scar, it was a reminder of survival. I renamed it simply Beginning, because that's what it truly was, the start of everything that followed. Years later, people still ask me what truly happened that night. I always gave the same answer. Nothing special, just a woman finally realizing her worth. That was all it had ever been. The details didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came after, the peace, the strength, the clarity. I built a career, a community, and a life from the ashes of that moment. And sometimes, when I walk into a ballroom now, I still look for that empty chair. Not with sadness, but with gratitude. It was the seat that set me free. Time passed, and I began to understand that healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes in quiet layers, through ordinary days that no longer feel heavy. I stopped checking the news, stopped wondering about the Hendersons, and started focusing on new experiences. My work, my travels, my foundation, all of it reminded me that purpose grows best after pain. Every morning, I woke up feeling a little lighter, a little more certain that I had made the right choice that night. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was evolution, one calm day at a time. One afternoon, I met a journalist for coffee. She was writing a feature about women who rebuilt their lives after public humiliation. She asked if she could include me. I agreed, but only if she focused on the lessons, not the gossip. During the interview, I realized how much had changed. My voice no longer shook when I spoke about that night. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was wisdom. The article came out a month later, and readers loved it. People saw strength in my silence. That felt better than any defense I could have given years ago. After the article, more women reached out to share their own stories. Some had been dismissed at work. Others ignored at home. They said reading my journey helped them take small steps toward change. Their words made me emotional. It reminded me that pain shared with honesty can build bridges. I wasn't just healing for myself anymore. I was part of something larger. A quiet movement of people realizing they didn't have to stay small. I promised myself I would never waste my voice again. It was meant to be used, not silenced. I began mentoring full-time, balancing it with my business. The foundation expanded internationally, and we hosted annual summits for creative professionals. Each time I walked onto that stage, I thought about the girl who once sat in a ballroom corner without a seat. She would have never believed this future was possible. I didn't erase her. I carried her with me. Her quiet strength had been the foundation of everything I'd built. Every smile from the women I mentored felt like an echo of her courage, multiplied across hundreds of lives. The following year, I received an unexpected invitation from the hotel where everything began. They wanted to honor me for my contributions to the event industry. I accepted, not for recognition, but as a symbolic return. The night of the ceremony, I walked through the same glass doors, the same marble floors, but it didn't feel like the past. It felt like victory, without bitterness. Staff members greeted me warmly, and some even whispered how proud they were to see me back. The walls that once witnessed my humiliation now held my redemption. During the ceremony, the hotel director spoke about professionalism and grace under pressure. Hearing my name associated with those words filled me with quiet pride. I gave a short speech about resilience, reminding everyone that the worst day of your life can become your turning point if you let it. There was polite applause, but what mattered most was the feeling that washed over me when I stepped off the stage. I had finally reclaimed that space, not by force, but by growth. Sometimes you win simply by standing where you once broke. After the event, I walked alone to the terrace that overlooked the city lights. The air smelled the same as it had that night, years ago. But everything else had changed. I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't waiting to be seen or included. I was choosing where I belonged. That realization was more powerful than any award. As I looked out at the skyline, I thought about how endings can disguise themselves as beginnings. The night they left me out of their story was the night mine truly started. When I returned home, I found a message waiting from Ryan again. It wasn't long, just a thank you. He said he'd read about my achievements and was genuinely proud. I didn't respond, but I smiled. Not out of nostalgia, but understanding. People grow at different speeds, and maybe he was finally starting to. I didn't need closure anymore. I already had it. Knowing he recognized what I'd become was enough. I wished him well silently and moved on, content that the past no longer had power over me. It was just a chapter, not my definition. The next morning, I had breakfast on my balcony, the city waking up below. My laptop pinged with new inquiries, opportunities from places I'd only dreamed about. I took a deep breath and opened my planner. Life wasn't glamorous every day, but it was stable and honest. That was enough. I had learned that fulfillment comes from peace, not applause. The world outside was unpredictable, but inside, I had found balance. That was something no one could take away anymore. I didn't need revenge stories. I was living proof of what survival looked like. Months later, my foundation's annual summit took place. Hundreds attended from around the world. We discussed creativity, boundaries, and how to rebuild confidence. When I walked on stage, the applause felt different. It wasn't about success, but connection. I shared the one sentence that had guided me since that night. If they don't give you a chair, build your own table. The crowd stood and clapped. I wasn't emotional this time. I just felt peace. My pain had turned into purpose, and that purpose had turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. After the summit, I took a long vacation by the sea. No schedule, no deadlines, just time to think. I sat on the sand, watching the waves roll in and out, realizing how much life mirrors the tide. You lose some things, gain others, and both are necessary for movement. The night I was excluded had once felt like an ending, but now it felt like the moment the current shifted. Without it, I might still be chasing acceptance. Instead, I found peace. Life had given me exactly what I needed, even if it came disguised as loss. I started writing a book soon after, not about the Hendersons, but about rebuilding yourself after betrayal. Each chapter poured out naturally. I didn't hold back my experiences, but I focused on growth, not bitterness. Writing became therapy. It helped me see how every part of my journey connected. When the book was published, I didn't expect much, but it resonated with readers. Letters from strangers filled my inbox, thanking me for helping them find courage. I never wanted fame, but if my pain helped others heal, then maybe everything had happened exactly as it should. During one of my book signings, a young woman approached me and said she had been at that retirement party years ago, working as a server. She told me how she remembered that night vividly, the confusion, the tension, and the look on my face when I walked away. She said she never forgot it, because it showed her what quiet strength looked like. Hearing that took me by surprise. I hadn't realized people noticed that moment at all. It reminded me that even silent actions can leave a lasting mark. Strength doesn't always need an audience. As the years passed, I learned to measure success differently. It wasn't about status or wealth anymore. It was about waking up without anxiety, choosing projects that mattered, and surrounding myself with genuine people. I kept my circle small and my standards high. The world outside could chase noise. I preferred calm. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that honesty was worth more than any luxury I'd once admired. Freedom, I realized, doesn't shout. It simply lets you rest easy at night. That's the kind of wealth I'd always been searching for. One morning, while sorting old files, I found a small envelope tucked between papers. Inside was my original seating chart from that night, the one missing my name. I stared at it for a moment, then folded it neatly and placed it in a box of keepsakes. I didn't throw it away. It wasn't a painful reminder anymore. It was proof of how much I'd grown since then. That empty space on the chart had become a symbol of strength. Sometimes the place they deny you becomes the place you create for yourself later. The foundation continued to grow, now managed by a team I trusted completely. I stepped back slightly, letting others lead while I focused on writing and teaching. It felt right. Success meant something different now. It wasn't about control but contribution. Watching others thrive under the same values that once saved me was deeply rewarding. Every event, every meeting, every shared story was a reminder that no setback is final. I had once been written out of someone's story. Now I was helping others write their own, stronger and clearer than before. During a panel discussion, someone asked what I would say to my younger self if I could. I thought about it for a moment and said I'd tell her to stop waiting for permission to matter. The audience went quiet. I didn't plan that line, but it felt true. That's what my whole journey had been about. Realizing I didn't need anyone's validation to be worthy. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was heartfelt. I smiled, knowing that maybe someone out there finally heard what I had needed to hear years ago. My story began to appear in leadership courses and motivational talks. Professors used it as an example of resilience and professionalism under pressure. I found it strange but flattering. I never set out to become a lesson, yet here I was, a quiet example of what happens when dignity wins over drama. It made me grateful for every step, even the painful ones. Without them, there would be no story worth telling. And without that night, I might never have learned what real power looks like. It's quiet, calm, and completely unshakable. Years later, I was invited to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for my work in event design. The ceremony was elegant, but what touched me most wasn't the recognition, it was the people who stood by me. My staff, friends, and former mentees filled the room, clapping with genuine pride. I looked around and realized something important. These were the people who saw me for who I was, not who I was married to. They were my chosen family. That mattered more than any trophy. Love built by respect always outlasts the kind that demands silence. After the award ceremony, I sat in my car for a while, holding the plaque in my lap. I thought about that night years ago, sitting in a car outside the hotel, holding my laptop instead. Back then, I was taking back control. Now I was simply at peace. The two moments felt connected, like bookends to the same story. The first was about reclaiming dignity. The second was about living it effortlessly. Growth doesn't erase the past, it redefines it. I smiled, turned the key, and drove home, content with where life had taken me. The following week, I visited my parents again. They had grown older, but their warmth hadn't changed. We sat in the garden, drinking tea, and talking about simple things. My father said he always knew I'd find my way. My mother just smiled, saying she was glad I was finally happy. It struck me how different real love feels. Quiet, steady, unconditional. The kind that doesn't demand perfection, only peace. I didn't need to say much. They already knew that I had turned my hardest lesson into my proudest strength. On the drive back home, I passed by the old Henderson building. The company logo was gone, replaced by a new name. It looked smaller now, less intimidating. I slowed for a moment, then kept driving. That part of my life was finished. The world had moved on, and so had I. There was no anger, only acceptance. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to stay in the past as reminders of how far you've come. Seeing that empty space on their building felt symbolic. Every empire eventually fades when built on pride. That evening, I sat by my window, watching the sunset paint the sky orange. I thought about everything I'd built since that night. It wasn't revenge or redemption, it was evolution. The person I'd become wasn't born from spite, but from strength. I used to think justice meant making others regret hurting you. Now I knew justice was simply living well, despite them. The world had changed, and so had I. There was peace in knowing I'd turned pain into purpose, humiliation into honor, and exclusion into empowerment. That's all I'd ever needed to win. The next day, I received a letter from one of my first mentees. She had opened her own planning agency and wanted to thank me for believing in her. She said she remembered me saying, "No one can take what you build with integrity." Reading her words filled my chest with quiet pride. That one sentence had carried me through my darkest years, and now it was guiding others. Legacy, I realized, wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about leaving behind strength that others could borrow when their world felt small. As I placed her letter in my box of keepsakes, I looked at all the memories stored there: notes, awards, photos, and even that old seating chart. Each piece told the same story: a woman who refused to disappear. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, earned, and peaceful. That missing chair had started it all, and I wouldn't change a single thing. I turned off the lights, closed my laptop, and smiled. Some stories don't end in revenge or regret. Some end in quiet victory. Mine was one of them. A few months later, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a leadership summit. The topic was finding strength in silence. Standing backstage, I thought about everything that had brought me here. Years ago, I would have been nervous, second-guessing every word. Now, I felt calm. I didn't need to prove anything. When I walked onto the stage, the crowd went quiet. I shared my story, not of revenge, but of rediscovery. I told them that silence isn't weakness. It's clarity, and when you learn to stand alone, you stop being afraid of being left out. The audience listened closely. Some nodded. Others wiped away quiet tears. When I finished, they rose to their feet in applause. It wasn't loud or wild, just warm and sincere. That moment felt like a full circle. Once I had been ignored in a room full of people. Now every eye was on me, not because of status, but because of truth. I didn't need their approval. I just appreciated their understanding. As I walked off the stage, I felt lighter, as if that missing chair had finally turned into a platform I built myself. After the event, several attendees came up to thank me. One woman said, my story helped her decide to leave a toxic partnership. Another said she'd stopped doubting her own worth after reading my book. Hearing those words made me emotional. I realized that every painful step of my journey had created something meaningful for someone else. Pain had shaped me, but purpose had saved me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was helping others do the same. That realization made everything I'd been through finally make sense. The story had found its purpose. That evening, I returned to my hotel and sat by the window, looking out at the city lights below. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who smiled through humiliation, trying to belong. I wanted to tell her she made it, that every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it. Life hadn't been fair, but it had been honest. It gave me exactly the lessons I needed to build a better version of myself. That thought brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. I had finally healed. Back home, I hosted a small dinner with my closest friends. No formal speeches, no photographers, just laughter and warmth. As we sat around the table, I realized something beautiful. I finally had the kind of family I'd always wanted. Not one built by blood or status, but by mutual respect and kindness. The people around me didn't see me as a role or title. They just saw me. That night, I looked around the table, smiled, and thought, this is what belonging truly feels like. It was quiet, simple, and absolutely perfect. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The streets were calm, and the air felt fresh. I passed a shop window and caught my reflection. There was no trace of the timid woman who once apologized for existing. My posture was different, my gaze steady. Growth doesn't happen overnight. But one day you look in the mirror and realize you've become the person you always needed to be. I smiled at my reflection, whispering a quiet thank you to the version of me who refused to give up when it was hardest. Later that week, I visited the headquarters of my foundation to check on a new project. The office was full of energy, young planners, designers, and coordinators collaborating freely. Watching them reminded me of how far the industry had come since my early days. The environment was supportive, not competitive. That was the culture I had dreamed of creating. I felt proud knowing that my experiences, both good and bad, had built something that would outlive me. Legacy, I realized, isn't about your name being remembered. It's about leaving behind something that helps others rise higher. One of my team members showed me a mural they'd painted in the office. It said, "If they don't give you a seat, build your own table." The words were bold across a wall of bright colors. I laughed softly, touched by the gesture. That sentence had started as a quiet reminder to myself, but now it inspired hundreds of people. Seeing it written there made me realize my story no longer belonged to me alone. It had become a shared symbol of strength, proof that dignity could outshine any kind of rejection. That evening, I walked through the city, stopping at a small bakery I used to visit during my early years in business. The owner still recognized me and asked how life was treating me. I told him it was peaceful, and he smiled, saying that's the best kind of success. He was right. Peace wasn't loud or flashy. It was soft, steady, and genuine. As I left the shop with a warm pastry in hand, I felt grateful for how simple happiness could be when you stopped chasing things that didn't matter. Months later, I was invited to an awards gala, honoring leaders who had changed their industries. I hadn't expected to be nominated, but when my name appeared on the screen, I felt a wave of emotion. I walked to the stage as the crowd applauded, not out of pride, but gratitude. In my speech, I said I never set out to change anything. I just refused to stay quiet when I was treated as invisible. That one decision changed everything. The audience clapped, and I saw in their eyes that they understood exactly what I meant. After the ceremony, a young planner approached me in tears. She said she had almost quit her job because of constant disrespect, but stayed after hearing my story. She said, "You made me believe I could build something of my own." I hugged her and told her she already had. Walking away, I realized the ripple effect of one brave moment can reach further than you'll ever know. The night they left me out, I thought I'd lost everything. I hadn't lost anything. I'd simply been redirected to the life I was meant to live. The following week, I took a few days off and visited the countryside. I rented a small cabin, surrounded by trees and silence. There was no internet, no phone signal, just quiet. Sitting on the porch, I listened to the wind move through the leaves and felt completely at ease. I didn't need recognition or validation anymore. I just needed moments like this, where peace felt complete. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to sit with your memories without pain. In that stillness, I realized I had nothing left to prove to anyone, not even myself. That night, I sat by the fireplace and opened my journal. I wrote about everything I'd learned, the value of self-respect, the strength in walking away, and the beauty of starting over. I ended the entry with a single line. The seat they took from me became the foundation I built my life on. Closing the notebook, I felt calm. I had turned one painful evening into a lifetime of purpose. It was proof that no matter how deeply someone underestimates you, you always have the power to redefine your own worth. Always. The next morning, I drove back to the city. On the way, I passed a billboard advertising a luxury event, one of mine. Seeing my company's name in bold letters brought a quiet smile. I didn't chase recognition anymore, but moments like that reminded me how far persistence can take you. The road stretched ahead, open and golden in the sunlight. I didn't know where life would lead next, but I wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. Uncertainty had once scared me. Now it felt like freedom. The story wasn't over. It was still unfolding. Back in my apartment, I brewed tea and sat by the window watching the sunset. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and the city below began to glow. I thought about everything I'd gained: peace, confidence, purpose, and everything I'd lost that no longer mattered. The woman who once waited for acceptance had found self-acceptance instead. I didn't need to be included in their story because I had written my own. It was a story of quiet rebellion, resilience, and rebuilding. The kind that doesn't end in bitterness, but in balance. One evening, I received a message from a documentary producer wanting to feature my story. They said it would inspire others. I hesitated at first. My life had already been public once, and I valued my privacy. But then I thought about all the people who still doubted their worth because someone else made them feel small. If sharing could help even one of them, it would be worth it. I agreed. The documentary aired months later, and the response was overwhelming. People found hope in the quietness of my journey, not its drama. After the documentary, my inbox flooded with messages from viewers. Some were from women rebuilding after betrayal. Others were from men learning how to support their partners better. It touched me deeply to see how universal the message was. Everyone wants to feel seen, valued, and respected. My story wasn't about gender or revenge. It was about humanity. That connection made me realize something simple but profound. Healing others through your truth is the purest form of closure there is. I didn't just survive my past, I had turned it into light for others. Years later, I was asked to deliver one final speech at an international summit before retiring from active work. Standing on that stage, I shared the same message that had guided me all along. Never let anyone define your worth by where they seat you. Your value doesn't come from their table. The audience erupted in applause. As I stepped down, I realized this would be my last public appearance, and it felt right. I had said everything that needed to be said. My story had come full circle, ending exactly where it should. In retirement, I spent my days traveling and writing quietly. The world had slowed down, and I enjoyed it that way. I visited small towns, met strangers with stories of their own, and found beauty in simplicity. Looking back, I didn't feel regret or pride, just gratitude. Life hadn't been perfect, but it had been honest. I had faced humiliation and turned it into peace. I had lost comfort and found freedom. I had been left out of one table, but ended up creating hundreds of new ones for others. That was more than enough. One afternoon, while cleaning old boxes, I found that same folded seating chart again. I smiled, running my fingers over the blank space where my name should have been. It no longer hurt. It reminded me of how everything begins with a single decision to stop settling for less. I framed it and hung it in my office. A quiet reminder of the night that changed everything. Visitors often asked why it was blank. I'd tell them that's where I built my life, and that always made them smile, even if they didn't fully understand. Time moved gently. The foundation thrived under new leadership, and I remained involved as a mentor. Watching others continue what I started filled me with quiet pride. I didn't need to lead anymore. Legacy doesn't require control, it just needs trust. Knowing the work would go on without me brought peace. Every time a new planner found her voice or stood up for herself, I felt a spark of the same strength that had carried me through my hardest years. My story lived on through them, quietly shaping futures I'd never even meet. One evening, while attending a charity dinner as a guest, I noticed a young planner nervously managing the event. She reminded me of myself years ago, focused, kind, underestimated. When she came to check on our table, I thanked her sincerely for her work. Her eyes lit up with surprise and gratitude. That small exchange reminded me how much kindness can mean in moments of doubt. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can give someone is the reassurance that they're seen. It costs nothing, yet it can change the direction of a life completely. In my later years, I often reflected on how small moments change everything. A missing seat, a quiet decision, a walk away instead of an argument. Those moments had rewritten my entire future. They taught me that dignity doesn't demand attention. It creates its own kind of power, the kind that can't be taken. I shared that thought often with younger people, reminding them that their silence, when chosen from strength, isn't emptiness. It's composure. It's control. The kind I once found on a night when everyone thought I was defeated. Looking back now, I see that my story was never about revenge or success. It was about finding peace through truth. Every decision, every quiet act of defiance had brought me closer to the life I was meant to live. I had learned that losing people who don't value you isn't loss, it's direction. I didn't just survive being left out, I flourished because of it. And that, I realized, was the most unexpected gift of all. What once broke me had quietly built everything that mattered. That's how strength truly works. On a calm evening, I sat by the window, watching the sky turn gold. My reflection looked older now, but content. I closed my eyes and thought of that night one last time. The lights, the laughter, the missing chair. I smiled softly. That chair had started it all. It had taught me that exclusion can be the doorway to self-discovery. I had turned pain into peace, silence into strength, and absence into purpose. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a simple truth settle in my heart. I was finally home.